Okay, my name's Heather Pritchard and I live on a cooperative farm in the Fraser Valley. And I have been a member of a worker cooperative as well that farms the land. And the people who farm the land are also resident of the farm co-op. And so that kind of where I started from. And then while I was working for Farm Folk City Folk, helped to set up another cooperative called BC EcoSeed. And then BC EcoSeed is actually housed on our cooperative farm. So there's a lot of cooperation between co-ops. And then more recently, because as I would say is, and I think the takeaway from this conference is that you start with where you have a need, where you've identified a need. That's the beginning. So we identified a need to be able to decommoditize land, to be able to transfer land from private ownership into where it was available as a community asset for people to be able to access it, farm it, forage on it, or whatever they wanted to do that was related to food. And so now we've formed the Foodlands Cooperative of BC, and it's like a second tier co-op, we often call it, because it's made up of organizations that are looking at all the different ways that we can take land out of speculation and make it available. Well, our cooperative farm was actually what we called a rural-urban community in the early days, and I lived in the city in community alternatives for 18 years, and then we purchased the second property, the farm, the 10 acres right beside our farm, and at that point I moved out to the farm. So I've been at the farm for 22 years, so totally that's what, 40 years I guess I've been in this cooperative community. Yeah. Well, I think in the early days when we started out in the 70s, it was kind of like around the Back to Land movement, and there were a lot of people who were really looking for alternatives to mainstream, and probably the challenge in those days was to take their ideology and to put it into practice. And I guess there was enough people that were willing to do that, to battle some of the regulations, to purchase a farm. In the beginning, we didn't even farm it, and we were hoping to provide city folks with food, but the city folks were so, their practices in the city was like they'd go to the grocery store and buy food, and so we didn't get that going until we actually had a farming cooperative on the land that would grow the food, and then in the beginning didn't even sell it to our own members. And we started up and sold it to restaurants and other customers. So there was a challenge to bring those things together. To bring the ideology and the practicality together was a big challenge too.
We heard from some of the speakers about the challenges of interpersonal relationships and how, in a cooperative you really need to get to know people. What has been some of the challenges with that, and just how have you been able to navigate that?
Okay. I think that's at least half of what it is. Working together is actually getting to know each other, getting to like each other, getting to trust each other. And I always say when people are forming co-ops is to kind of live together and work together for at least a full season, agricultural season, to see whether you're compatible. And always people come in with ideas that this is what they want to do, and then they find out in the end that they, for all kinds of reasons, that they don't want to continue. So rather than getting married right off the bat, and being embroiled in something that's legal, live together for a bit, figure it out. So I think the big challenge in trust is finding the time to be together enough that you build that trust and a shared experience. And people who are really adverse to meeting have a really hard time with co-ops. That's a huge challenge. I don't want to meet, I just want to do things.
Was there a time for you yourself where you really had a lot of doubts and you considered leaving the cooperatives? And looking back, how do you feel about that?
There was one time when we had somebody in the co-op who was just like, when we made our decisions by consensus, and he disagreed with everything. And there was no pleasing him. So at one point, we had a break in the meeting, and I followed somebody out, and she said, I'm quitting, I'm leaving. I can't stand it anymore. And I said, look, you don't leave, I don't leave, right? If you leave, I leave. I'm not leaving, you're not leaving, you just have to stick this out. It's kind of like most of the difficulties, I think, are interpersonal. You know, it's like communication is the absolute key. If you can spend time learning whatever it is, it's nonviolent communication. But for me, the ones that have succeeded the most are ones that have come together and done a combination of, like I always say, the magic combination is to work together and to eat together and to meet together. And probably the meeting would be the last thing. You know, once you get out on the land or whatever it is and you start to work together, the communication starts and flows. You take a break, you have fabulous food, and then you stay together, and all the things you've discussed during that start to be recorded and shared. And that's, I mean, I think that works a lot, works really well.
We also heard a lot about the colonial history of Canada, how government in Canada intentionally broke communities apart, and the systems really are designed to promote individual lives. What is your hopes for the future? Do you think that we can move back toward living communally and living together? Can we find our way back together?
We are, right? You are, we are. So it's, are we going to make enough of an impact, I guess, is the situation. And we have to look at young people who really are having a struggle doing it on their own. So if working and cooperating together is a need, or an answer to a need, then I think we've got a good chance. I'm always aspirational.
Do you have any?
Go ahead. I wouldn't be continuing to do this work if I didn't think it was making a difference in some way.
Do you have any other comments or stories you want to share with us?
Pick a topic.
Production. How does your food production in the cooperative work? Like, how do people pick up different tasks?
Okay, so to start with, we have a worker cooperative, registered worker cooperative, that farms the land. And it's been going for, I'm just trying to think, like 20 years probably or so. So that they operate as a business, but collectively as a business. So at the beginning of the year, typically what we would do is we would have a planning session where we would talk about, like, what would you like to do? We've got a system whereby certain people take on and are the captain. They say, I'll be the captain of this. And then other people will say, well, I'll help you out, or whatever. Or we'll co-captain this, so that there is an organized structure in terms of who is responsible for the work. And layered on that would be, when are the deliveries going to happen, and who's going to be responsible for the deliveries, and that kind of thing. And then we have a long history of collected data on what we plant. It's kind of like the planting guide, which we have created and kept up over the years. So it's both virtually and in a big binder that we can take into, say, the greenhouse. We have unheated kind of polyhouse type greenhouses. And so you'd say maybe under the alliums or under the brassicas, you'd have these many the things we are going to plant. We've maybe cut them down from a dozen to now we're just going to plant 4 different varieties, and this is when we're going to plant them. And the planting plan starts with week 1, which is January the 1st. And so it goes through the whole cycle. So we've got systems that we've developed in terms of how to farm, and big whiteboards where we keep things up to date and people go and check it off and erase it. You know, Monday morning caucuses where we all get together and be clear about what it is that we're all going to be doing. Just all kinds of different things. But over the years now, and I just retired from that 2 months ago, but Mark, who's a young farmer who's taken the lead in doing this, he's read a lot about lean farming. And so the advantage of that for us is that the farm is really cleaned up, you know, and the tools are all have a place, and there's all of these things he's done. He's also cut down somewhat on the diversity to make it more economical. And it's a choice on whether or not you want to include some of that diversity that may not make you money. It's how much diversity do you, that's a challenge. There's a monocropping on the one hand, and then there's on the other hand the craziness of trying to do everything. Well, because a worker co-op is set up as a business and it's a for-profit cooperative, so the people working in it and making decisions are the people who are part of that group, and that's how they make their livelihood. So that's a clear kind of division. The land co-op itself owns the land, manages the land, manages the leases with the worker co-op, all the other activities on that land that might not be part of the farming business. So we've had a kids camp, we've had hide tanning workshops, we have a beekeeper, we have things that are on the fringe or make it really diverse. We've had we have a relationship with an Indigenous woman who does wild walks on the farm. And we've got long tables to raise money for the farm. When I say for the farm, it's kind of like there's a really close reciprocal relationship between the farmers and the farm. So a number of people live on there that aren't part of the worker co-op, and that's a challenge. Like in the beginning, a lot of us were part of the worker co-op and also part of the farm co-op. And now as we've aged out a bit, one person died, you know, that kind of thing, we're now needing to look at succession, bringing new farmers on, which we are doing. And that's, I think, the current challenge. And one of the big challenges is with agricultural land is that housing is so restrictive. And I talk about that all the time. And so that if we could have more housing on it, it would be easier. All the farmers in the last, 10 years or 5 at least or whatever, have want to live on the farm when they come and work there. And we have no housing in our area at all. There's nothing. And if there was a bachelor suite, it would go for $1,200 a month or something. It's so expensive. So I think our biggest challenge is just figuring out what we do about reconciliation because we're on stolen land. And also, what do we do about housing both the retiring farmers and the new people that want to come onto the land?
So, yeah, you talked about reconciliation. What are some of the things that we could do to try to build relationship with Indigenous people as we're building these new systems?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one that Foodlands Cooperative is asking, and we've gone through a process collectively to help us look at the effects of colonization and how do we decolonize our cooperative. And one of the first things we are doing is to offer support to our cooperative farms to have Indigenous-led listen to the land is what we're calling it, listen to the land events and activities, so that we actually see the land as something that we have a relationship with. It's not just about what we grow on it, but how are we in relationship to the land and how is it reciprocal. And I know for me personally, just having that focus has been pretty powerful. And even though I've lived on it for a long time, I haven't seen it in that intimate way as to when I really get right down to relating to it. So we're helping farms to do that and have these led by the indigenous people in their area, which then means that they have to reach out and find them. But they also have something to offer them. And I guess the other thing would be to one farm that has really good relationship with the local indigenous people said that had a hard time answering that question and said it's, first of all, most people would say you just show up. If they need support for whatever it is, you show up. You don't ask for anything in return, you just show up. You build a friendship, basically. The other thing you might do is invite people to come for a feast or whatever it is. And I think you start with where you're at, like who do you know, and take it really slow. Everyone says really slow, because if you take it fast, it looks like you have an end result. Give up on the end result. You're building friendships. You know.
Yeah, your story is very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing it. And yeah, look forward to learning more about it.
Yeah. Look to hearing more about what you're doing there too as well.